Hey kitties, it's Triple Feature Tuesday once again, and this week we're looking at Alice in Wonderland in the 1980s. The classic tale by Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I mean, everybody knows the Disney adaptation, and probably younger people know the more recent Tim Burton inspired adaptations that are they're just awful. But the premise, just the overall stranger in a strange land, character gets transported to a strange place that they can't make heads or tails of, and then spends the rest of the story trying to make their way back home. This is a classic formula that has been around forever, and in fact, I mean, Gulliver's Travels came out before Lewis Carroll's book, so there's that, even though I think Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is more of just a straight novel, whereas Gulliver's Travels was more episodically released as like short stories that were then collected together. But that's neither here nor there. Movies love this. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is Alice in Wonderland with more singing and thinly veiled political commentary and propaganda. So I thought it'd be fun to look at some of my favorite versions of this tale from the 1980s, when all movies were interesting and new to me because I am older than you, more than likely. What's great is that you can put it in any genre, say like horror, sci-fi, fantasy, anything that you want, and it'll still basically work as long as you hold on to like your one main normal character and then everything going bonkers around them. So our menu is going to include Labyrinth, Tron, and After Hours. We're going in order of age and maturity of our protagonists. So we start with Jim Henson's Labyrinth. This is the last film that Jim Henson directed before his untimely death, so if nothing else, this is a historic artifact. And I would argue a pretty good movie. It originally did not do well in the box office, despite having, you know, Jim Henson, the whole Creature Shop, David Bowie working on it, and I think George Lucas produced it. I think this was like one of the three fantasy movies George Lucas produced in the 80s that tanked and made him not want to do this anymore. I think it was like this, Howard the Duck, and Willow all kind of soured him on it for a while. But Labyrinth, for 80s kids, became a cult classic, and for men of a certain age, introduced us to the sublime beauty of young Jennifer Connelly, who would, you know, somehow just get more attractive as she gets older. I mean, we all end up, you know, getting older and less attractive at some point, but she is really just still on the upward trajectory, because Jennifer Connelly. She plays Sarah, who is a, you know, not necessarily a spoiled brat, but a very put-upon teenager in her own mind, at least, and cannot deal with her father's remarriage and her new stepbrother. And so when she gets pulled out of her normal daydreams and flights of fancy, she angrily wishes that her brother be taken away, and in comes David Bowie as Jareth L. Coplin, the Goblin King, who is more than happy to do whatever the hell she says, as long as it gets a rise out of her and maybe sort of like negs her into loving him forever. It's kind of weird and creepy. But so Sarah has 13 hours to find the kid and get back home, and she has to navigate the titular labyrinth, which is a gigantic maze, labyrinths are not mazes technically, but we're going to let that go. I would argue there's more story than it just being an excuse to try out all sorts of different puppets and technical gags, which they do more than enough of. Like Hoggle is incredible. Like Hoggle and Ludo are essentially the same thing, but in different sizes, because it's man in suit with animatronic head, and both of them are incredible. You have the standard Muppety type puppets, but then you get some neat blue screen stuff with the fire guys, and I thought the oubliette with all the puppet hand people were really inspired. And all throughout that you have David Bowie just kind of running around and being David Bowie with his oh-so-tight pants and amazing wig, and a lot of really great songs. He wrote all the songs for it, and I was really happy, like, seeing some behind-the-scenes stuff where you see him, rehearsing and doing all the songs and recording all the songs, and he's really getting into it, so it wasn't just like a little, there's something to do. It's like, it's something he really enjoyed and took seriously, so that just made me happy. But all throughout it, Sarah is perpetually taken aback by all the craziness that's happening around her and all the idiosyncratic characters that she has to deal with that don't seem to understand. She just wants her kid, just wants to grab the baby and go home. It becomes like this is getting in her way this way, and this person is being obstinate this way, and she's got to figure this all out. And as with all good Alice in Wonderland type of things, life lessons are learned, and our character is stronger for having gone through it. And so by the end of the movie, Sarah has grown up a bit, but still loves the things that she loves, but has now, filled up or will allow more space in her life for all the new things that are happening with her family. And, maybe look for something a little bit more mature in terms of a crush than the Goblin King, even though he is amazing and apparently, home. Tron. Tron's pretty fucking great. Sorry, I try to avoid F-bombs, but Tron! I love it. This is like just a straight up Disney fantasy movie pretending to be a sci-fi film, because it's like this really is like there are a lot of movies like Star Wars or The Matrix where they're technically sci-fi films that incorporate fantasy elements, but if you look at it, it's all mechanisms, machines, and that's how we get through everything. Tron, because it was made in the early 80s before anybody really understood what computers were and did and how they worked, it's really just a fantasy movie clad in sci-fi clothing. And it makes it a lot of fun throughout the whole thing. Our main character, Kevin Flynn, who was a genius programmer for NCOM and made all these video games, but they were stolen from him by the evil, sneakier programmer Ed Dillinger, played by David Warner. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, forgot to mention Kevin Flynn is played by Jeff Bridges, which makes this movie amazing. And so Dillinger took all the credit, got Flynn fired. Flynn has been running an arcade and ruling the arcade, and meanwhile hacking into NCOM, trying to get proof that he created all the best video games ever before, Ed Dillinger took all the credit for it. But that's not working out. Enter his ex-girlfriend, Lori, played by Caddyshack Lacey Underall fame, Cindy Morgan, and her current boyfriend, Bruce Boxleitner, and they are having trouble with the system and working in NCOM because the master control program is running everything with an iron fist. And so they get Flynn into NCOM so he can hack from a more direct location, get the information he needs so that he can take down Dillinger and the master control program, and everybody can be happy and write computer programs in freedom to their heart's content. But the master control program knows what they're all up to, so it zaps Kevin Flynn into the games, and for the rest of the movie, Kevin Flynn is trying to get out of the video games and the computer system and back into reality. Because science. I should have mentioned this with Labyrinth, but with all good Alice in Wonderland-y type adventures, this could all be a hallucination. Kevin Flynn could have just lost his goddamn mind and, hit his head and fell out of the chair when he got jolted or whatever. Sarah could just be having an extended dream in which she thinks her younger brother was kidnapped. But we'll go with it's probably reality for now, because, if it's not, what's the point? It's more fun if they actually got zapped into the computer. And oh boy, Flynn is in the computer. Everything looks so fascinating. What's neat is that there are so very few actual computer special effects in this movie. It's really all just optical rotoscoping stuff with the lights coming through everybody because of the way they filmed it, and then all these other things. If you are around my age, which would put you in the mid-30s, and you saw this as a kid, it was just the greatest thing ever, because with the light cycles and the frisbees that kick the shit out of everybody, and then everybody looks cool with the glowy stuff. David Warner is so scary. It's like the skinny Sark that ends up growing into a giant guy, and the evil master control program, which is like the big tube that would eventually go on to play Moses in South Park, which was always kind of a good gag. Definitely the emphasis is a lot more on the craziness of the place that the main character has gone to, as opposed to more clever dialogue and or extended metaphors for different mental illnesses or life lessons. But Kevin Flynn, through the course of all of this, learns to care about other people or as much, if not more, than himself. Like throughout the whole thing, he has been fairly selfish in terms of wanting to get his credit and his money for his products, and then trying to just get out of the computer network. But by the end of it, he sacrifices himself to help Tron, the titular security program played by Bruce Boxleitner, because I love the gag. They actually address it where it's just like a little bit. Bernard Hughes, the one of the founders of Encom, says is like, we put ourselves into our programs, you know, with all the code that we write, and so every program is being played by their programmer. So Bruce Boxleitner in the real world is playing Tron in the electronic world. And so Kevin Flynn sacrifices himself to buy time for Tron to take out the Master Control program, and a new age of computer freedom is ushered in. And also, you know, as a side plot, the Master Control program is stopped from taking over the Pentagon and thus ushering in, you know, Judgment Day a la Terminator, which, you know, fun fact, this was came out in 82, Terminator 84, so, you know, Jim was stealing not just from Harlan Ellison, but also from Tron. All the gags are there. Character transported into a crazy place and then trying to get out of it through the bulk of the film to, you know, varying degrees of success, until finally, hooray, he does it. Not sure if everything works out quite as well for our last entry with Martin Scorsese's After Hours. I have a penchant for existential horror films, your Cemetery Mans, your Collateral, your Fight Club, or Vampire's Kiss. Things where, like, the world goes crazy or your main character goes crazy throughout the whole thing. This could be one of those. It might not be the world, like, it may have just, like, the world has gone crazy on Paul Hackett, played by Griffin Dunne. He met a very attractive woman, played by Rosanna Arquette, who, as you may remember, is a very attractive woman. And she invites him to visit her in Soho. And he goes downtown to Soho, and every single thing goes wrong for the next 2 hours as he, you know, tries to hook up with her and fails miserably, and then just tries to go home, but everything keeps conspiring against him. And this one is much more traditionally like in Alice in Wonderland, where it's like sort of connected episodes meeting strange characters, like the Rosanna Arquette character, Marcy, and also her roommate, Kiki, sculptress, played by Linda Fiorentino, which, guys, Linda Fiorentino. Her S&M boyfriend, Horst, played by Will Patton, in, like, just the trademarked Will Patton creepo way. When that goes wrong, he tries to get home, and as it turns out, the subway just kicked over into a higher fare as of midnight, you know, 20 minutes prior to when he's trying to get home, and he doesn't have enough money to get home. Until maybe John Hurd, a bartender, is going to help him, but then through a series of circumstances, he's not going to help him. And also, he was actually Rosanna Arquette's boyfriend, and she killed herself, and he's going crazy. And Terry Garr was John Hurd's waitress at the bar he works at, and she's pretty crazy, and has sketched Griffin Dunne, and has framed him for all these burglaries that are happening. And then he's trying to get help from Catherine O'Hara, who has a Mr. Softy truck, and then she's trying to murder him. And everything just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. But the atmosphere of the film is my favorite thing, because it might just, I think it's a combination of the way Scorsese shot it on these completely empty streets in the middle of the night in Soho, New York, but combined with a very synthesizer-heavy Howard Shore soundtrack, just reminds me of Italian horror movies, and so it just has that kind of, where have I ended up? Where did the world go? And what makes this triple feature equal parts terrible and fascinating for me is that it can be, like I said at the beginning, the location and the genre matters less than the whole series of events going crazy around the character. So instead of a medieval type of fantasy place or the inside of a computer, you know, life can just be scary just going across town and you're not familiar with it and or how to get home in a quick and efficient way. Which, I mean, that sounds kind of lame for Griffin Dunn's character at this point, but keep in mind, this is early to mid-'80s New York when it was still a shithole, and he has to go basically 100 blocks across town to get home, and he can't do it in the middle of the night or else he's going to get killed. But then again, there are literal posses of people running around trying to kill him because they think he's this serial burglar that's been making all of their lives miserable. Part of the gag is that this movie was originally supposed to be Last Temptation of Christ. Martin Scorsese had made King of Comedy, and his next movie was going to be The Last Temptation of Christ, but then the funding for it fell through, and he ended up working on this movie, and he used it for a lot of therapeutic needs, and so the more he shat on Griffin Dunn's character, the more he ended up just feeling better about his own life. Whereas Flynn and Sarah definitely show growth by the end of the film. Not quite sure about Paul. I think they came up with the best possible ending of him just being literally dropped off at work, having to deal with like a whole nother day after the craziest night of his life. You're not quite sure if Paul's learned anything. He's learned probably a lot of great survival skills, and throughout the whole thing, he shows a great propensity for ad-libbing lies to get him into places and or get him out of situations. But throughout the whole thing, he doesn't know what happened to make everything awful. And honestly, while he was a bit of a shit to Marcy, he didn't really do anything to engender quite the level of angry mob that is chasing him around for most of the night. So, not quite sure if Paul has learned anything or if he's going to be a better person at the end of it. But he does manage to get home, which is a crucial thing. An Alice in Wonderland type story, the character has to get home by the end of it, or else it's just a straight horror movie, which, I love. But hey, I didn't do straight horror triple feature, even though that was a threat. So, Alice in Wonderland in the 80s. If you were to watch all three of these, this would just be a nightmare. Labyrinth, Tron, and After Hours, and I will see you guys next week.